If I could have Councillors Bodnar and Hoyle move the agenda. Are there any questions? All in favor? Carried. Are there any disclosures of interest? Seeing none. So we have a statutory public meeting regards with item 4.1, public meeting report for proposed zoning bylaw amendment D14-01-23, 2023-71. And at this time, if I can call Chris Room forward to give us the presentation. Chris?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the purpose of this meeting, pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act, is to consider a zoning bylaw amendment application submitted by the applicant Susan Smythe of the Quartet Group on behalf of the owner Talia Dosa, Tishiana Racine, and Salvatore Carrera. The land's known as Concession 2, part of Lot 25 on the south side of Chippewa Road, formerly in the township of Humberstone, now in the city of Port Colborne within the regional municipality of Niagara. The zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning of the subject lands from residential development to a site-specific third density residential zone. Notice of public meeting was administered in accordance with Section 34 of the Planning Act as amended and Ontario Regulation 545/06. And notice of public meeting was circulated on March 22nd, 2023 to internal departments and agencies. Notice was also circulated via regular mail to property owners within 120 meters. Meeting details have been provided along with the council agenda on the city's website and under current applications. As of the date of this meeting, staff has received comments from the following commenting agencies. The drainage superintendent, there is no objection. Canadian Niagara Power had no objection to the proposed application, but mentions that hydro poles are located along Highway 140 and Chippewa Road. And then Enbridge had no objection to the proposed application. However, they reserve the right to amend or remove development conditions. Formalized and fulsome comments from the Niagara region and engineering staff are forthcoming and will be included in the future recommendation report. The procedure to be followed this evening will be to present Development and Legislative Services Report 2023-71, pass the meeting to the applicant to provide a presentation, hear any comments or questions of clarification from council to the applicant or planning staff, open the meeting to the public for comments and announcement of the requirements under the Planning Act for written notice of passage for the application. And at this time, I'd like to present Development and Legislative Services Public Hearing Report 2023-71. Okay. Oh, one too far. So the subject property is located along Chippewa Road and Highway 140. The surrounding properties are zoned as RD and R1 to the north, R1 to the west and south, and mineral aggregate operations to the east. The surrounding uses consist of residential dwellings to the north, west, and south, and then a quarry facility and pit to the east. Does this thing go to the next slide? There we go. The City of Port Colborne official plan designates the subject property as urban residential and is also located within a designated greenfield area. Land uses in the urban residential designation include residential, neighborhood commercial, community facilities, and institutional uses. Residential land uses, including detached, semi-detached, and block townhouse dwellings, are permitted land uses in the urban residential designation. The land use designation is not proposed to be changed as a result of this application. Sections 2.4.4 and 3.6 of the official plan will be used to assess the application when a recommendation report is brought forward at a future date. These sections provide policies on greenfield lands as well as the general policies for the urban residential designation. The current zoning of the subject property is residential development, and the RD zone currently does not permit any of the uses that are proposed in this application. The application for zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning of the subject lands from residential development to a site-specific third density residential zone to permit a 169-unit development. Adjustments to lot area and setbacks for detached, semi-detached, and townhouse dwellings, lot coverage for detached dwellings, and permitting more than one principal building on the property under condominium ownership are being requested as a part of the special provisions. At this time, Your Worship, I would like to pass the floor to the applicant, Susan Smythe, for a brief presentation. And she is attending virtually today.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Good evening,
Good
Susan.
evening.
How are you tonight?
I'm very well, thank you. I wish I could be there in person, but I was running late from my office and couldn't make it to Port Colborne, so my apologies. So good evening, Chair, members of Council Committee, and those attending here at the public open house, for the information about the proposed residential development. Again, as Chris mentioned, I am a senior planner with the Cortec Group. I am assisting the owners with this application to amend the zoning bylaw to suit the development for a mix of housing on the east side of the city. I will quickly provide a synopsis of the project and thank Chris for providing some background information as well, which will then leave more time to listen for comments and to address any questions you may have. Next slide, please. This slide just provides some general background information, just kind of leads on to what Chris had provided. So again, the subject lands is on the south side of Chippewa Road, west of Highway 140. The lot has a frontage on Chippewa, although the greatest exposure is to the site along Highway 140. The lot is 6.69 hectares or 16.53 acres in size, with 161 meters of lot frontage on Chippewa, of which will be the main access into the proposed development. However, the developable land area, so that is actually going to be developed for the proposed housing, is reduced to 5.42 hectares or 13.39 acres. And this is because of the 14-meter setback along the eastern edge adjacent to Highway 140. This is a Ministry of Transportation requirement of the 14-meter setback, where there can be no development proposed. So with that consideration, the proposed density for this development is approximately 31 units per hectare, which is under the minimum unit hectares for the regional density requirement for Greenfield area, although it is slightly higher than the low density threshold, but it is generally considered an appropriate concentration of housing units compatible that can be compatible with the neighborhood. The site currently has one house and several accessory buildings, all of which will be removed for the proposed development. The site's physical characteristic is that there is a gradual slope from Chippewa Road and it heads south to Berkeley Avenue. The slope or change in the grade is approximately 4 meters or 13 feet in difference. Aside from the existing buildings, majority of the site is vacant lands with fields, and there are some wooded areas along the perimeter adjacent to a significant woodland feature. That's along the west side of the property. This wooded area has been identified by the region official plan as a key natural heritage feature. To mitigate from any of the potential impacts to this woodland feature, the proposed lots that are going to be running along the western edge will have an identified 5 up to a 10-meter buffer from the drip line of the trees to avoid concerns with disruption to the roots of the trees and or canopy of the trees. The site, as noted by Chris, is surrounded primarily by residential uses with the industrial quarry operations to the east and Highway 140. Next slide, please. This slide is a representation of the conceptual site plan, which delineates the different housing types to be constructed in the proposed development. The site plan with the colored yellow, it represents the 21 single detached dwelling lots. 8 of these lots will have direct frontage on Chippewa Road, with access to the house from the back off the private road. There will only be pedestrian access to the house along the front and no separate driveways off of Chippewa Road, as it has been directed by the Ministry of Transportation that is not permitted. The lot area for these lots will range between 320 square meters up to 350 square meters. The city's zoning regulation for minimum lot area for a single detached is 400 square meters. So therefore, we are seeking relief for that bylaw regulation. It's a reduction of 80 square meters for those particular lots. Additionally, there will be 13 single detached lots. Again, the yellow that is shown on the internal area of the site, with 10 being on the western edge off of the private road, which is adjacent to the woodland feature, as well as 3 additional lots at the very south end of the site. These lots are a little bigger than those fronting Chippewa, and those lot areas can meet the zoning regulation of 400 square meters. These single detached lots will have either a garage attached or detached from the house, depending on further development as we work through the site plan process. The lighter orange signifies the proposed semi-detached dwelling. So there are 40 units and or 20 semi-detached dwelling lots. Again, these are all along the eastern edge, adjacent to Highway 140. These units will have direct frontage off of the private road with an attached garage, and their rear yards will be adjacent to the highway. The lot area for these lots will be approximately 450 square meters. According to the city's regulation for semi-detached lot, 500 square meters is the requirement. So again, we are seeking amendment for a reduction of 50 square meters of that provision. As we move to the interior of the site, the darker orange colored areas, those represent the townhouse dwelling units. In total, there's 108 townhouse units. There will be scattered block townhouses along the western edge, which is identified adjacent to the woodland feature. You can see it set back, and I'm not sure if you can zoom in or not, but the reason for the setback is, again, to minimize that impact to the adjacent woodland feature. So therefore, the 10 and 5 meter setback is a no touch zone, so no development can occur there. So there will be a continuous chain link fence along those rear yards, so no opportunity to access. In this section of those townhouses, there will be 2 blocks containing 8 attached units, and then 1 block of 5 attached units for a total of 29 units along that side. The larger group of townhouses on the interior, which is closest to Chippewa Road, there will be containing 5 blocks of 8 attached units and 1 block of 5 units. So in that section, there will be a total of 45 units. And then the other group of townhouses, which is in the middle or separated between visitor parking spaces, there will be 4 blocks of 5 attached units and 2 blocks of 7. So these different blocks provide a variation and breaks in the massing of these townhouse units, so that it just does not symbolize one large solid wall of units or massing of units. Next slide, please. So to recap in terms of the proposed development, it will be through a private condominium referred as a common element with parcel of tied lands. So whereby the units, that being the houses and garages, will be owned by an individual, but the lands will form part of a common element under the condominium corporation, such as the roadways, the landscaped areas, sidewalks, storm pond. The main access will be from Chippewa Road. The private road will have a width of 7 meters or 23 feet wide from curb to curb. There will be an interior sidewalk with a width of 1.5 meters or 4 feet wide on one side of the road. There will be 1 dedicated parking space in the driveway, as well one being provided for a garage per unit, and the additional 22 visitor parking spaces, all of which meets the zoning requirement. There will be a storm pond for the collection of drainage conceptually located at the southeast corner of the site. Further detailed design will be required at subsequent site plan phases to confirm the size and location of this pond. We will be working with the ministry as well as the region and city on that stormwater management pond. As noted before, there is that 5 to 10 meter buffer for the woodland feature. This was a suggestion and has been approved by the region of Niagara to prevent any intrusion or impact to that woodland feature to the west. To sum in terms of the number of units, again, it's 169 units with 108 townhouses, 40 semi-detached dwelling units, and 21 single detached dwelling units, ranging between a 2-story, 1 or 1.5 story in building height. Next slide, please. Sorry, just to go back in that other slide there, I wanted to make mention as well that there will be not only just the continuous fence for the woodland feature, which is the chain link preventing any intrusion, but there will also be a fence that will form part of acoustic mitigation that will run along Highway 140. So this will prevent for noise mitigation from the highway and both the quarry operations. Also, as part of comments received from the city, some of the selected units on the interior of the development will require to be sprinklered for some fire protection. Next slide, please. This slide just provides some general and example unit renderings. It just kind of gives a sense of what these houses can look like, what type of style, the types of building materials, use of brick, stone, vertical siding, all in a variation of colors. All of what will be confirmed at the subsequent site plan phase. But what we would like to make mention is that we're trying to be complementary to the neighborhood in a higher density built form. The average house for the single detached will range between 1,800 and 1,895 square feet up to 3,000 square feet in size. The semi-detached houses will be approximately 1,270 square feet for a single story and can go up to 2,500 square feet for the 2 stories. The townhouse units will range between 1,600 to 1,800 square feet. Next slide, please. To support the application for the zoning amendment, the following technical studies, which took approximately about 2 years to complete, were provided to all the commenting agencies, including the city, for review. Upon this list, the geotechnical study was the requirement to assess the conditions of the soil to determine the bearing capacity for construction of the roads as well as the houses, and to determine if there are any detriments for the development. The study concluded that the soil conditions consist of the thin deposit of cohesive clayey silt declay, and some traces of sand and gravel, with some limestone and bedrock, shale rock, which is a sedimentary rock, at shallow depths across the site. Because of this condition, the study did conclude that sump punts as well as drainage weeping tiles will be required for the residential construction. As part of the archaeological findings, there were no concerns that were raised. In terms of the noise and air quality, these studies were completed to determine the potential impacts from the adjacent quarry operations as well as the traffic noise from the highway. The study did conclude that, again, as noted, a barrier fence will be required to protect the living areas from exposure of the transportation noise from the highway, as well as the operations from the quarry. One thing to make mention is that the quarry has submitted to the Ministry of the Environment for approval to move the operations further east, which therefore will be better for this proposed development, providing a greater buffer. The other recommendation was that air conditioning be provided, and that window and building materials that offer additional mitigation from noise and air quality. Next slide, please. Additionally, there was a requirement for the scoped environmental impact study. And this again was due to the key natural heritage feature that is identified to the west of this site. And it was just to confirm that the wooded areas on the subject lands was not deemed significant. The study did conclude that the proposed development does not result in any direct impacts to the significant woodland to the west. And that again, the continuous rear yard chain link fence without any gates is to be provided as the buffer to mitigate any impacts for human access or encroachment into that significant woodland. So in terms of the traffic study, understanding that this proposed development will contribute to an increase in the number of vehicles in this area, the study was completed and has been circulated to the Ministry of Transportation, Region of Niagara, and the city for review and comments. To note, the ministry did provide support in principle in November of 2022, indicating that although this access into the development does not meet the standard 400 meters from the intersection with the highway, the proposed setback of 190 meters will be acceptable as the main access. The traffic also concluded that all movements are expected to operate at acceptable levels on this local road, with 91 movements from 7 to 9 a.m. during the peak hour, and 112 movements from 4 to 6 p.m. peak hours. The study also concluded that there should be a dedicated north-left turn lane with a storage length of 30 meters that is warranted under the conditions, however, in the future, so not immediate, so in 2026. A dedicated turning lanes are not required at the intersection of the site at Chippewa Road. The conclusion of the study also noted that traffic signals are not warranted at the intersections of Highway 140 and Chippewa, and also that it's not expected to result in any significant traffic issues along Chippewa, as its majority of the traffic will be prompted to use Highway 140, which has a higher posted speed and is quicker access onto the Highway 3 into the city. As noted, the parking requirements are being satisfied with 1 per unit and the additional visitor parking spaces. Next slide, please. As noted by Chris, this will be a site-specific zoning amendment, changing it from the residential RD zone to third density residential. Here is the identified request or relief for the zoning amendment. To make mention, the minimum lot area reduction for a single detached, as I noted previously, was approximately 80 square meters in reduction. The minimum lot area reduction for the semi-detached as well as the block townhouses is 50 square meters in size. To make mention is the front yard setbacks. All of them are requesting a reduction from the 6 meters to 4.5. And this primarily meets the urban design guidelines for an improved street presence. Additionally, there is the requirement for reduction in the exterior side yards. And again, this is to, as well as the increase in lot coverage from 50 to 55%, all of which is to achieve a higher density of development, which will ultimately assist the city to meeting the density requirements and established in the official plan. Next slide, please. In every application, there is the requirement to examine the proposal against the provincial, regional, local policies to ensure consistency and conformity with regards to good land use planning in the public interest. In this regard, the proposed development does conform and is consistent with the provincial, regional, local policies for residential intensification located in the urban limits and greenfield area. It also is integrating a dwelling type and a new housing that can accommodate and attract a different type of lifestyle and affordability for the city. The proposal is also going to be efficiently utilizing existing infrastructure as well as providing new services for condominium ownership, which will be under the long-term maintenance of the condominium and not to the city, as well as the proposal providing an excellent opportunity for redevelopment of land that can be maximized. Next slide, please. So this is just to provide an overview of the next steps. Essentially, we will be taking, after this public meeting, we'll be taking some time to address any agency or public comments that we cannot address this evening, followed by the city preparing a recommendation report for council deliberation. And then pending the approval of the bylaw, a 20-day appeal period, and then we'll be moving towards preparing the detailed design reports and drawings for the subsequent site plan and draft plan of condominium applications and approvals. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And Mr. Room?
At this time, Your Worship, are there any questions of clarification from council to myself or the applicant?
Council? Seeing none at this time? Oh, sorry. Councillor Bagu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just gotta stick my hand up higher, I guess.
That's right.
I'm so used to being in your seat for the public meetings.
That's right.
Anyways, a question, I guess, for Susan. You mentioned a few times the main access is Chippewa Road. Then on some of your slides, it says access is Chippewa Road. So when you say main, I'm sort of thinking there's going to be another access because this is the main one. There's going to be a secondary access. So is there only going to be one at this time?
Susan?
Through you to Mr. Chair, yes, that is correct. There is only one main access. To be quite honest, through the progress of this application, there was some exploration of a potential emergency access to exit through down to Berkeley. However, it was found that it's not a requirement, particularly because of the fact that we can have some of the units sprinklered if the private hydrants cannot essentially meet the distances. So some of those units will be sprinklered for fire protection. So to answer your question, there is only one main access off of Chippewa Road, which has been approved by the Ministry of Transportation.
Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Susan, for the presentation. Susan, when you talk about condominium development, we have another one that's going in here in Port Colborne. You mentioned about the private streets within there. So is my assumption correct that as the development progresses, water, storm, sanitary, road maintenance will not be turned over to the city and it will be handled privately by the condominium corporation?
Susan?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. The condominium will be responsible for the long-term maintenance of such uses, as well as the private road.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? Councillor Beauregard?
Your Worship, to the presenter, the site with rock being so close to it and so easily at the top of the soil, it could pose some challenges with grading and servicing. Has there been any preliminary design for the site?
Susan?
Through to you, Mr. Chair. At this juncture, there has been some conceptual designing completed, and it did form part of the application package under the functional servicing report, and it can be made available for review upon request. So yes, the geotechnical did study the depths of the bedrock, and that is why there was the requirement for the sump pumps as well as the weeping tiles. But further exploration through the next phases in terms of the depths as to where the infrastructure will be laid will be done through the site plan as well as the draft plan stage.
Councillor?
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Further questions? Councillor Hoyle?
Through your worship to the presenter, I was wondering if there was any consideration of additional green spaces, because it seems everything's so compact and it's probably the first one I've seen that had no green space allocation on it.
Susan?
Yes, if you don't mind, can someone pull up the proposed site plan, please? Through to you, Mr. Chair, as well. So to answer that question, there will be some areas that will be left as open green space. It may or may not be sufficient to put, say, a parquet. However, there will be some areas that will be available for maybe some seating areas. They're just not highlighted right now in green. But so if we can just zoom in, so the triangular pieces that are just on the side, I don't have control, sorry. So On the left-hand side of the bigger block of the townhouses, you'll see two areas that are triangular in size. So there will be some green open space in that location. So just on the south side of the single lots fronting Chippewa, there's some open space there. As well as there going to be some open space around the stormwater management pond. But keep in mind too, there will be some requirement, and again, I don't know if that's going to be open for recreational purposes. But I know in some developments, if it's feasible, you can put essentially a little walking trail around it. So these are different elements that will be explored through the site plan phase.
Counselor? All set, thank you. Counselor Elliott?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the presenter. You have asked for a 20% reduction in the lot area for detached dwellings. But what I don't see is what's the frontage of the lots?
Susan?
Sure, through to you, Mr. Chair. There are no requests for reductions in the city's already zoning requirements for frontages. I think for the singles, it's 12 meters. So we meet that requirement for single detached. And same thing with the semi-detached, it's 18 meters or 9 meters per unit. We are meeting that requirement, as well as the townhouses. The minimum front yard, the minimum frontage, if you will, I believe is 6.25 or 6 meters, and we are meeting that requirement for lot frontages.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Counselor. Further questions? Seeing none, Mr. Room.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before opening the meeting to the public, I would like to read the following. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is passed by council, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the City of Port Colborne Council to the Ontario Land Tribunal. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions before a decision is made on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there is a reasonable grounds to do so. To any interested members of the public, if you wish to receive any future notices regarding these applications, please contact me by email at chris.room@portcolborne.ca or by phone at 905-835-2900. My extension is 205. We'll leave my information up on the screens there for anyone who wants to write it down. Or the acting city clerk at Charlotte Madden. Additionally, a sign-in sheet has been provided at the back of the room to provide your contact information. At this time, Your Worship, I'd like to invite any members of the public who wish to speak to the applications to do so.
Great, thank you, Mr. Room. I do have a list here. Just to remind everybody, when you do come to the podium, there is a red button on the speaker. Press that before your presentation. I'm going to remind everybody you have 10 minutes. So we'll be watching the clock for that to keep everybody on track. And then we can go to questions after each speaker from council. So my first speaker is Harry Walls.
Good evening, council, staff, and members in the gallery and those at home. Thank you for the opportunity to express my concerns regarding this development. The provincial policy statement plays a very important role in municipal and regional land use developments to ensure the adjacent land uses are compatible. Section 1.2.6 and specifically Section 1.2.6.1 requires municipal planning to avoid the development of sensitive land uses such as this one that will result in adverse effects like odor, noise, and vibration in accordance with the provincial guidelines such as, but not limited to, the Ministry of the Environment for conservation parks. And if you look at the provincial policy statement, it goes on in section 1.2.62 to identify How to protect the long-term viability of adjacent, existing, or planned heavy industrial uses from encroachment in accordance to the provincial guidelines, standards, and procedures. And you may wonder why I refer to a heavy industrial. Well, the mineral aggregate activity that's taking place across the 140 is a heavy industrial class 3 use, and it is to my understanding that the plans are to continue to use that well into the future, not only for quarrying, but for other uses. There must be an identified need for the development, which in this case there is. There's no question that we need housing, and that's in very high demand, so there is no question that we have a need for that. There are no reasonable alternative locations. Well, that's not really true. We have lots of other properties that are looking to be developed, so there are other alternative locations that could be used for development of this type. Adverse effects between the sensitive and heavy industrial land uses are mitigated and minimized to the extent possible. We heard that we're going to have a fence separating the two. Well, a fence doesn't do diddly squat. When you have a heavy industry on one side, a little fence, and then the 6 meters to the house. There's virtually no protection there for the houses on that side. And the report, if you look at the report speaks about the impact that development will have on their surrounding properties, but not what the surrounding properties will have on the development. So that perspective wasn't taken. In addition to ensuring that land uses are compatible, the provincial policy statements in section 2.4.3 addresses rehabilitation of mineral aggregate operations, such as Pit 1, to accommodate subsequent land uses. Well, this is the intent of the 1982 site plan agreement between the city and Port Colborne Quarries that is not being honored or enforced, and Pit 1 rehabilitation to a compatible use to this development is required by the PPS and the 1982 site plan agreement. The provincial policy statement continues. As I said, it's very important. Section 2.5.3 of the provincial policy statement goes on to state that extraction is an interim temporary use and it's required rehabilitation to promote compatibility and to mitigate negative impacts to the extent possible. And that is to the extent possible, to whatever is possible. Pit 1 was established before the Aggregate Resource Act, and as such, it is not required to be rehabilitated under the Act and was never licensed under the Act. But 2.5.33 of the provincial policy statement gives the city the justification to hold Port Colborne Quarries accountable to the 1982 site plan agreement to rehabilitate Pit 1 to a passive recreational lake, which would be compatible with this proposed development. With regards to the PPS, in section 1.2.6.1, it is mentioned that I mentioned previously, it proposes that development conform to the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks D6 guidelines for a minimum separation distance from Pit 1. The Ministry, the MECP D6 guideline identifies that this proposed development and a heavy industrial use are incompatible, and a minimum separation distance of 1,000 meters from property line to property line is required. If measures can be demonstrated to and implemented to mitigate any adverse effects, then a minimum separation distance of 300 meters may be permitted. So what we're looking at is something like this. If you look at the red area indicates a 300-meter property line to property line separation, identified by the ministry's minimum separation distance of 300 meters. And if you look at the drawing, you will see that the minimum separation distance there is 53 meters on the north end, or south end, I'm sorry. Separation distance to the actual semi-detached living units and Pit 1 property line will be from 68 meters on the south end to 106 meters on the north end, well below the 300-meter minimum separation distance. Any heavy industrial land use that is proposed for Pit 1 will be within the D6 minimum separation of 1,000 meters. And this was not discussed in the report of what future could be there. Yes, Portland Quarries is going to move their crushing activity, but they plan to build something else there. But we don't know what that is, so how can you do an assessment based on the unknown? We've developed a 2020-23 strategic plan, and our mission statement in that was to provide an exceptional small town experience in a big way. I don't know if this development, with the houses compacted and so tight, with the way it is designed, lives up to that mission statement. We wanted to retain that character and feel of a small city. This is definitely not a small city feeling that you will get when you drive into Port Colborne. In summary of the situation, we need the housing and should do what is needed to ensure that this development addresses future housing needs. But this needs to be accomplished keeping within the city's strategic plan while retaining a small city character and feel. Pit 1 has been depleted for years, and Portland Quarries proposes to rezone Pit 1 for heavy industrial Class 3 use. The final heavy industrial Class 3 use of Pit 1 has not been identified nor approved. The reports submitted to support this development do not demonstrate mitigation or minimization of the adverse impacts to the proposed development, as the final use of Pit 1 is unknown. The requirements of the PPS are not satisfied unless Pit 1 is rehabilitated to a compatible use, and the MECP D6 guidelines are followed for the final rehabilitated state of Pit 1. The PPS, MECP D6 guidelines, and the 1982 site plan agreement provide the city with the justification and means to require Pit 1 to be rehabilitated to a compatible use with regards to this proposed sensitive land use development. The development is below the Ministry of Conservation Parks minimum separation distance from Pit 1, so adverse impacts will be experienced based on the MECP's experiences. In conclusion, this proposed development should not proceed until the use of Pit 1 is finalized, so proper means of mitigation and measures can be established to minimize the adverse impacts associated by the final use of Pit 1, or Pit 1 needs to be rehabilitated to a use compatible with this proposed development as intended by the 1982 site plan agreement.
Great.
Thank you.
Harry, before I let you go, just state your name and address for the record. Thanks.
Oh, yes. My name is Harry Wells. I live at 548 Highway 3 East in Port Colborne.
Perfect. Questions? Seeing none? Thanks, Harry.
Thank you.
Next, we have Melissa Bigford. Name and address, Melissa. Thanks.
Melissa Bigford, 173 Chippewa Road. Good evening, Mayor, members of council, members of the public. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment, D140123, should not be approved. We have significant concerns with the impact these changes will have on the surrounding neighborhood. To begin, I would like to bring to council's attention the Public Works Department report that was brought to council to address residents' concern about speeding and volumes of traffic on Chippewa Road. The report states that Chippewa Road is a local road that provides connectivity between Highway 140 and Regional Road 3. The posted speed limit is 40 kilometers for the entire section. The width of the road allowance varies and is less than the standard 20 meters width of a typical two-lane local road allowance for most of its length. Upon measuring on the roadway, the average width of the roadway is only 7 meters. Chippewa Road is a narrow right-of-way with open ditches and hydro poles along both sides of the road. Council approved traffic mitigation measures to help reduce incidents of speeding along Chippewa Road and the reconfigurations of the stop sign at the Berkeley intersection. The report concluded that through the implementation of these recommendations, Chippewa Road between Highway 140 and Regional Road 3 would be safer, more aesthetically pleasing, and reduce traffic levels. So after implementing mitigation measures at reducing traffic levels on Chippewa Road, is the city recommending the addition of at least 169 cars entering and exiting onto Chippewa Road. I also am confused because the applicant's consultant spoke that it would be one spot per garage and one spot per driveway, so that would be 338 cars exiting and entering onto Chippewa Road. Then later stated it's one car per home in their condominium agreement. Which one is it? Why are similar potential operation and safety issues of vehicles turning left onto the 140 from Chippewa Road not being considered? How will a single entrance into this large development affect police, ambulance, and fire response times? Have the individual agencies been contacted to address any concerns a single entrance will have on their response time and operational procedures? We have concerns with the traffic impact study supplied by the developer. Why was a new detailed traffic study data count not been required? The consultant referred to traffic studies from High 140 at Chippewa Road from November 6, 2018. Traffic has significantly increased in the past 5 years, as presented in another report to Council regarding Chippewa Road pedestrian safety. Staff presented the speed radar device data, and it was identified that a significantly larger volume of vehicles were traveling eastbound along the Chippewa Road towards Highway 140 than westbound entering the city from the Highway 140. The following is a summary of data extracted from that speed radar device for the Chippewa Road with a posted speed limit, again, of 40 kilometers. The data was collected over a few period starting in October 21 and ending in November 2021. Eastbound traffic, the total vehicle count, so that's people leaving Port Colborne on the Highway 140, was 25,450. So a daily vehicle count is approximately 909 vehicles. The westbound traffic, people entering port via the 140, the total vehicle count was 16,665. So daily vehicle count is approximately 595 vehicles. Again, staff's own traffic study shows a much higher volume of traffic than the dated studies presented by the developer. This study was done in the late fall, which did not account for the increased tourism traffic during the summer months. Concerns with the increase in accidents due to the speed of traffic exiting Highway 140 onto Chippewa Road and the number of cars turning left into the development at only 190-meter distance from the highway instead of the required 400-meter setback. Why are the Ministry of Transportation and the city allowing the application to be submitted for approval of non-compliance of the 400-meter required setback from a highway? Also, where was the 190-meter distance measured from? I measured from the stop sign at the 140, and the 190-meter distance from the entry exit of the development is abutting the existing residential landover, not the separated distance as shown on the presented concept plan. The applicant's own geotechnical report states that any significant deviations from the proposed project design may void the recommendation given in their report. Yet the traffic study report is based on 188 homes, and the geotechnical report and the other reports submitted state 169 homes. The original submitted documents applications to the city stated 176 homes. Which one is it? How many homes are to be built on this property? How will the 8 single detached homes abutting Chippewa Road be prevented from entry/exit onto the roadway? Will there be basements in this development? If so, why were monitoring wells not installed? Excavations for the installation of foundations and underground services are generally expected to extend to depths of up to 1 meter to 3 meters below the existing grade. The geotechnical reports state the depth of before hitting bedrock was between 0.1 and 0.5 meters. This leads to the potential for blasting into the bedrock. Will there be controls over any blasting? How will the impacts from the noise and vibration of the blasting be monitored to protect the surrounding neighborhood? Given the shallow depth of the bedrock, will the development have to add fill? How will this fill affect the grading to the surrounding properties? Also, as presented at last week's public meeting, How will the surrounding properties be protected against flooding due to the increased grade and added fill? If they are adding fill, where will this fill come from, and what assurances are that this will be clean fill? Can the existing water supply infrastructure network adequately support this development and design flows? It is proposed that the sanitary sewage flows be collected through a new 200-meter diameter on-site sewer system and flowed to a prefabricated lift station wet well at the south limit of the site. Sewage will be pumped from there to the 200-meter PVC sewer on Chippewa Road. How will a wet well be established in the limestone bedrock? Who will maintain this wet well? How far will this sewage travel from the south end to the PVC sewer on Chippewa Road? Again, can the existing sewer infrastructure support the extent of this development? How will the current ditch, stormwater drainage along Chippewa Road be affected? What is the proposed base elevation of the storm management pond? We have concerns with the considerable amount of limestone bedrock that will have to be removed to facilitate the stormwater management pond. Who is responsible for the maintenance of the storm management pond? Will a fence be erected around the storm management pond? Why has the size of the storm management pond not been determined? How will proper overland flow be ensured to prevent ponding and protection of the significant word lot during major storm events? Will storm management controls be implemented in order to treat storm runoff prior to discharge from the site? What are the potential direct and indirect impacts to the natural features, including the significant woodlot? What is the proposed height of the townhouses? Where is the parkette located? Also, is the parkette large enough to suit the proposed size of the development? The exact noise, dust, and air quality impacts of building such a large development in close proximity to Port Colborne quarries is immeasurable due to the unknown future use of Pit 1 and the fact that they state it is unlicensed and continue to do what they want within that pit. Where is the Stage 3 site-specific assessment that was required for Sites 1, 3, and 6 from the Archaeological Stage 2 assessment in accordance with the requirements set out in Section 3.2, 3.22, and 3.23 of the 2011 Standards and Guidelines for Consultant Archaeologists. Also, depending on the results of Stage 3 assessments, a Stage 4 mitigation of development impacts may be required. Given that there are outstanding archaeological concerns with the property, no ground alterations or development of any kind should occur until the required investigations are complete. Recommendations to lands require no further archaeological assessments are made, and the associated reports are entered into the Ontario Public Registry of Archaeological Reports. With the development being under condominium ownership, to what standard will the pavement structures of the roads be? Will it be to the city standards or the condominiums? If the condominium ownership goes bankrupt or folds, who is responsible for the maintenance of the road, infrastructure, and properties? Is it the city, and ultimately taxpayers who could become liable?
1 minute, Melissa.
In conclusion, the zoning bylaw amendments, special provisions, and reductions in minimum setbacks should not be approved. There are numerous issues and concerns regarding the development of this property as mentioned above. The sheer size and nature of this development, with all the reduced setbacks required to make it fit on the property, do not work and are not in the best interest of the city and the surrounding neighborhood. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Questions? Seeing none, thank you. Our next speaker is Donna Norman. State your name and address, please.
My name is Donna Norman, and I live at 229 Chippewa. And that's a hard act to follow. That's really a hard act to follow. I apologize, I'm not really a polished speaker, but I'm speaking from the heart here. The city policy states that new residential communities should be limited in size, and parks and open space features should be a focal point of new residential communities. I don't see that happening here. The plan shows no parkland really, or green spaces for children to play or for residents to use. The closest green space for the residents of 281 Chippewa to use is on the land at the Vale Center, located at 50 Elizabeth Street, which is across from a very busy road, past a Tim Hortons drive-out, and through a considerable amount of actively used parking lot. This is clearly unsafe for children to be traversing, and it will be their only green space, really. Without any green space available, the only unpaved areas or areas to relax and play in will be the front, side, and backyards, which are now being asked to be made even smaller to fit in even more housing. This is not a place for children. The issue of everything egressing out onto Chippewa, I think, is dear to all our hearts here. The only egress from this area, Chippewa Road has no sidewalks, really. It's used mainly as a quick cut through to port. With all due respect as well to the traffic report that was done, I'm sure it's right, and I'm also sure that they don't live on Chippewa or even in Port Colborne, because if you did, you would know that that is the cut through that everybody uses to get into town. The street's quite busy during morning and evenings as people rush to and from work. The speeding is prevalent and virtually unpoliced. The additional traffic calming pylons, which are only there for non-plowing seasons, does virtually nothing to stop the speeding and sometimes aggressive driving. The amount of housing that they're putting in here will logically double the issue by more than doubling the amount of traffic on Chippewa. The families and children who already live on this road will be extremely negatively impacted by any new housing that aggresses onto Chippewa. The traffic report, I did not see it. I didn't see it on the site. Like I said, I'm sure it's right, but I'm sure they don't live on Chippewa. So I'd just like to finish by saying our own website says it's a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but this is not reflected in this proposal at all. This is not a place to raise a family. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Questions to the speaker? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Roseanne Shields.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councillors, staff, and audience. My name is Roseanne Shields, 352 Chippewa Road. I'll try to omit repeating anything that has already been said. The City of Port Colborne definitions of roadways, the collector road, which Chippewa Road is designated as, collects traffic from local roads and provides access to arterial roads and are low to medium traffic with low traffic speed. Please keep this definition in mind as I speak to the trip generation, present and predicted. According to the traffic impact study, page 25, expected AM peak hour will have 87 vehicles and the PM peak hour would have 104 vehicles. The study refers to these numbers as a conservative approach. Then at present, the actual weekday traffic on the Chippewa Road actual count. AM is 169, PM is 207. The traffic report that they did was based on a sim traffic micro simulation. When adding the actual and projected traffic totals together, the total number of vehicles for the morning would be 256 and the evening would be 311. All of these vehicles will be traveling within the area from the entrance roadway and the stop sign at Highway 140, according to page 41 of the study, a distance of 190 meters. Present traffic concerns or problems. People using the Chippewa Road as access to Highway 140 frequently do not come to a full stop at the stop sign and pull out in front of the traffic on Highway 140, causing horns to blare and tires to squeal. They're either braking or they're speeding to try to get ahead of the people. People exiting off Highway 140 onto the Chippewa Road do not stay on the paved portion, but ride around on what is left of a shoulder. There are potholes which are evidence of that, which scatters the gravel onto the intersection, which periodically requires sweeping by, I'm assuming, the city. I'm assuming it's also done because it's a skidding hazard. As they come around, they would swerve. Cars taking the corner go over the center line and into oncoming traffic lanes. And that has been witnessed by me on a number of occasions because my driveway is right at that corner. The average width of the road, and that was mentioned by Melissa, is approximately 7 meters. That's the paved section. and you have basically a non-existent shoulder and then a deep ditch. Okay, sorry. On page 38 of the traffic impact study, it says, although the traffic analysis does not show any queuing issues at the intersection of Highway 140 and Chippewa Road, a dedicated northbound left turn lane with a storage length of 30 meters will be required. At present, cars already queue up to that suggested 30 meters, so I would assume that you get more cars, they're going to be queued back further. Should it not be increased because of the increased number of vehicles expected? And if it is, it would be very close to the very first driveway located on the Chippewa Road. Based on what I see on a daily basis and actual number of cars, I feel the concluding paragraph on page 38 is erroneous because it states, it can be concluded that the location of the proposed site access on Chippewa Road will not impact operations on Highway 140. The setback to the entrance was 100, they're asking, I think, for 190 meters. And in the preface of one of the sections that I read, it states that the proposed development is set back approximately 190 meters west of Highway 140, which is substandard to the recommended setback policy of 400 meters. The next section I have is the geotechnical investigation. Because I have lived there on the farm all my life and have dealt with trying to plant trees, you pickaxe them in. You cannot just dig. Items mentioned that notes shallow soil or topsoil. Page 2, monitoring wells were not installed on the site due to shallow bedrock encountered. Page 3, topsoil, a superficial veneer of topsoil approximately 100 to 200 millimeters, which works out to about 4 to 7 inches in depth. Then page 4, limestone dolostone bedrock was inferred from auger refusal at depths of 0.15 to 0.5 meters. Bedrock is generally weathered and fractured in the upper levels, becoming more sound with depth. And I can also attest to that, because you don't go down very far and you hit sheer bedrock. On page 6, a quote, it says, it may be preferable to raise the structures and provide supplemental frost protection to foundations to limit removal of limestone bedrock. Keeping this in mind, will there be basements or will they haul in extra soil to build up around the homes? This would force all of the runoff water onto the adjacent 2 residential homes at 241 and 251 Chippewa, causing flooding and or wet conditions, which at present they do not have. And extra questions? Mr. Wells spoke, I thought, very well to the problem with the Port Colborne quarries, so I'm not going to read anything about the noise impact studies. Just extra questions. If the project goes forward, who will be responsible for and pay for the damage done to the Chippewa Road from the heavy construction equipment that will be used? This traffic also will be added to the traffic that is already there. Will there be blasting to put in water and sewer lines? Will it cause damage to the walls and windows of my home and the adjacent homes? Who will pay for the damages if there are any? A question regarding site plan map. Why do the roads seem to be open-ended facing Berkeley Avenue if they have no plans to go that way? Would it not be a suggestion to have a cul-de-sac at the end and loop the two together if they're not planning to go forward? Question regarding site plan map. Why do the roads sorry, I duplicated my question. The map, what is a drip line and a drip line buffer? I know what a drip line is for a tree. What has it got to do with the back of this property? Is it a ditch? Is it a swale? Who's going to maintain it? And just follow up to the other points. Where are the green spaces and the playgrounds? There's awful lot of people who will be living there, and no place for the children to go except across Highway 3. That is all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Council, any questions? Oh, Councilor Bruno.
I should know this by now, Mr. Mayor, but how can I ask a question that was brought up by the presenter to the consultant? Doesn't need to
Well,
wait?
we can wait. Yeah, we can wait.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Roseanne.
Thank you.
Before I go back to councilors' questions, do you have anything more before we end?
Just the passage at the end.
Okay, yeah, okay. Councilor Bruno?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to the applicant's consultant. One of the things that was just brought up by Roseanne that I don't know that was accounted for, or I don't know if it can be accounted for in the traffic study. Based on the egress from the development, there is a potential for cars headed to 140 at key hours having to stack and wait. So you'll have cars coming out of the development, you'll have cars normally traveling to 140 on Chippewa Road. But during that peak time, the exiting, turning right out of the development may be clogged getting to 140. So was it taken into account where that exit onto Chippewa was in the event of cars being tied up at key times in the morning?
Susan?
Through to you, Mr. Chair. That is a good question, and that is something that I will have to bring back to the transportation consultant for further consideration.
Councilor?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councilor?
Through your worship to the presenter, there were some comments from the residents regarding pit 1 next door, well, across the highway. Was the ministry circulated the application? Were the comments from them on this at all?
Mr. Room?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, they were circulated. We haven't received any formal comments on them, but they will be submitted as part of the recommendation report.
Sorry, so we're still waiting on comments
Correct.
from them? Okay. Another question. In terms of the noise impact, there was a mention of a fence or some type of wall structure that would mitigate the noise. Is there potential for a potential like landscape berm or any sort of other type of buffer that may be more aesthetically appealing? To either one.
Mr. Room?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would actually defer that to the agent. I feel like it's more appropriate that they would provide a response for that.
Susan?
Through to you, Mr. Chair. So that is something of consideration. There could be the potential for both an acoustic type of fencing in addition to landscaping. However, we must be cognizant of the 14-meter separation from the highway, which is under the ministry's jurisdiction where nothing can be built. So this is something that will be, again, further explored through the site plan phase. Likely maybe adjustments that may need to be made for the accommodation of both landscaping and the fencing.
Councilor? All set? Any further questions? Okay. Before I get to the motion, Mr. Room, anything?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you wish to be notified of the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment, you must make a written request to the clerk. Only those persons and public bodies that give the clerk a written request for the notice of the adoption and passing of the zoning bylaw amendment will be given notice. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment recommendation report will return at a future council meeting. This concludes my portion of the public meeting, and I will now turn the meeting back to you, Mr. Mayor, to close the public portion of the meeting and receive the report for information.
Great, thank you, Mr. Room. So this time, if I could have Oh, sorry, you weren't on my list, but come on up. Oh, just state your name and address, please.
Chris McLean, 229 Chippewa Road. Good evening, everyone. The bylaw amendments referred to in file D14-01-23 for 281 Chippewa Road should not be considered at this time. As a resident of this area, I, like many of my neighbors, am concerned about any new development that may have negative effect on the area. One of my main concerns is the high water table in this neighborhood. I know some people have already brought this up. If it is not dealt with correctly, it will mean flooding for the surrounding homes. After reading through the reports, I've come up with the following information. Testing for stormwater management was not completed. No monitoring wells were installed and no rock quarrying was done. Due to the shallow depth of bedrock, the report indicates the pond needed to deal with stormwater would require the removal of considerable volumes of limestone bedrock. The above-mentioned tests are the only way to determine the design and cost of the pond, which, because of the required significant excavation, may prove not to be feasible. A study would also have to be completed to determine the impact of an operation that large may have on the surrounding area and residents. Beyond the stormwater situation, the development will more than double the homes and population in this area. With only one entrance to the property, there's going to cause significant traffic issues, and that's one of the things they brought up. And that doesn't include when it's garbage day and there's a garbage truck on the road, or when the school buses are running in the morning and in the evening too. That's going to cause a lot more trouble too. I do understand the need for development in Port Colborne, but it has to be done responsibly and with care and consideration of the existing residents and neighborhoods. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chris. And you were actually down as a written delegation. Yeah, that's okay. Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, Council, so I need a mover and a seconder. I'll go with Councillor Borgard, Councillor Hoyle. The Development and Legislative Services Department Report 2023-71 be received as information. Councillors, further questions? All in favor? That's carried. Mr. Room, anything to add? Okay. At this point, I now adjourn this meeting. We'll take a 10-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you.